let's get started. Cool, it works. So, the title of the presentation, Shifting Left, Why Security Can No Longer Be an Afterthought. And so, I'm Nicolas Narbais, I'm a Senior Technical Account Manager in Datadog. And so what I do on a day-to-day basis is I'm helping large groups to better use our solutions. This can go in multiple ways, but it's also a lot about providing guidance, helping them to go from point A to point B and finding the right milestone that will work for them, figuring out within their environment and their constraints, the organization constraints, what would be the first steps to go toward all of this. This also includes simply managing all the processes within Datadog, making sure that they have the answer way faster than if I were not there. And I think the last thing that I'm doing for them is being their representative within the company to make sure that their constraints and what they are doing is kind of known by all the product teams to make sure that the product evolves and help them better in the future. And so for those who don't know about Datadog, well, it's a monitoring and security platform that helps companies improve observability and the security of their infrastructure and application. All right, so let's get started. So before going into all the details of this presentation, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware that security is important, and I just wanted to give you two numbers. So this first one from the Identity Theft Research Center, which reported an increase of 17% between 2020 and 2021. So it's getting more and more important to be secured. And the other one from IBM saying that the average cost of a data breach is around $4 million. So I will not go too much more in details. I think you can find hundreds of these numbers online, but just to make sure that everybody on the same page. And based on that, I figured that all of you have a security department and also invest a lot of money there. And so this is where shifting left come into play. So before starting into on the topic of the presentation, I wanted to just briefly go through the history of like DevOps and where these things come from. So originally you have this kind of siloed approach where you have different teams, different managers in front of each team, and different KPIs. Everybody like functioning on their own. And then, as you may all know, it was all some kind of pass over the fence systems where you build some things or you do something and then you pass to the next person. And this brings a lot of issues where at any point of time when something fails, you have to figure out who is the next person to bring it back, and you kind of bring it back there, which disrupts all of the process and all the plan that this other person have already planned for and brings a lot of delay into it. And this gets worse when it arrives till the end of this kind of cycles where the security team find hundreds of different vulnerabilities and just send it back to the beginning to change all of it. And so this is where, from there, we started to have this kind of DevOps model and DevOps culture where the DevOps team actually have a representative from all of these different previous silos, representing by like the devs. You have a representative of operation, infrastructure, deployment, and QA, and have all of them working together to one unique goal, which is customer satisfaction. And this is where you will see KPIs such as SLOs, where people focus on, you have a kind of balancing between reliability and the speed of development, making sure that the customer is happy of what you already have and you can support them well. And you can also provide them new features and new things along the way at a rapid pace. So everybody's working towards the same directions. And if something is actually blocking, at a later stage, try to bring in more on the left or earlier in the process so that you can iterate faster. But still, in this kind of DevOps model, security is often considered at the end only, where as soon as you finish things, you may have worked 2 weeks and months into a specific project, a specific feature, and then you send it to the security teams for a final review before you move it to production. And this can cause a lot of friction. I had a colleague of mine who just told me an interesting story where they had like a month's worth of work that just end up going to the security team, and then they send to him like the whole 100 items to fix, which delays the actual roadmap, and everything is, all the customers kind of complains about it, etc. And it becomes kind of hard to work on this. And actually, when they review everything, and 2 weeks after, when they fixed all of the 100 issues, they actually realized that only the first like only 5 out of the 100 issues were actually relevant for them, because some of these other vulnerabilities that were introduced by this were actually covered by other software and other protection within the companies. And this is mainly the same principle that we had for DevOps. Like, the security teams may have a different KPI than you have. Your SLOs is something where you balance the speed of developments and reliability, but the security teams may just want to discover as many vulnerabilities as possible to prove their worth and prove that the investment that we put there is there. So there is a complete decorrelation there. And if you think about the fundamentals of DevOps, okay, there you go. If you think and this is where DevSecOps come in. There you go. There's a delay. Yeah, this is where DevSecOps come in, where you try to bring these people from security within the DevOps loops, so everybody shared the same KPI, and you can actually move on faster while incorporating security issues earlier in the process. And if you think about it, DevOps is built with a lot of things. So you have some methods such as Agile and Scrum that people are relying on, and then you have plenty of KPIs. I mentioned SLOs, but you have MTTR, MTTD that you can also rely on, and you have a huge focus on ownership and responsibilities. And all of this is also agreed by different parties. You need to have the developers, the operation, the business side of things to all agree that this is the objective, this is the KPI that we are looking to address, and the KPIs that we want to focus on. And if something goes wrong, if your SLOs go below a threshold, everybody knows that the customer experience is very bad, and you want to focus all your effort on reliability for the moment. And so arriving to this point is actually kind of hard, and it's a fine balance that you need to go through. So introducing security at this stage is kind of difficult. You need to change all of your process and incorporate new factors within your processes. So this is where I think I want to start to talk to you about is, I think there is 3 main axes that you can work today to shift left and bring this kind of concern of security earlier in the process. And it is still a culture change, so you don't need to go and do everything from the get-go. You can go step by step. And so what are we talking about when we think about security? Actually, security is kind of a broad topics. There is plenty of software around this. You have some that will look at all your configuration and figuring out if something or a non-vulnerability is there. You have some that are more focused on the runtimes and look at the workloads and figuring out if all the processes running are legit. Everything around event analysis, figuring out if all these attempts to log into your platform are relevant. You have more on application security, but also sometimes all of these tools and process is not only about something that you can buy and integrate into your processes, but also think about deployment speed. At what speed can you actually make a change in your environment? I think this one for me was extremely relevant in December when the Log4j vulnerability was introduced. My customers were having a bad time to figure out what is the scope of what they are looking at and what they can do as fast as possible. And so deployment speed is also part of the security. And you can also, you don't need to have an actual vulnerability to test this out. You can also create some fake scenarios and what would you do in these circumstances. Like if someone get access to your database, what can you do about this? Like what can you do today? You can put yourself into this situation just to figure out if you have the right process in place and you can respond to it faster. If you think about an airplane company, this is exactly what they do. The pilots, for specific situation, when things go wrong, they don't follow their instinct and don't follow what they understood from the past. They have proper books of instructions that they need to go through to react very fast to a situation. So put yourself into this, create this fake situation, document them so that next time it happens, you can go quite fast. And there is plenty of others, and if you are not too familiar with all this, this is a CNCF landscape, so quite a lot of things. You can look at it. But what I'm trying to say by all this is there may be a tool that is more fitted for your situation right now. Not all of them have to be set up today, and maybe one will just get you started, maybe because it's easier on this part of it, you have a very good engineer, or simply because you have these experts from these other technologies that will be very willing for you to integrate that. And so we come back to this DevOps model, and the idea of the loop is actually, when you think about all of these different technologies and what I talked about, they can apply themselves all the way through the loops. So you need to find the one that will be more adapted to you, and again, figuring out on the loops where things come from. And shifting left, I mean, for me, one of the tools that I love the most is the one that help you check your configuration, maybe on the QA test or something like this, before things reach out to the production. And this is what you can see sometimes when you look at your Terraform module templates, and you can see some big things like allow public read on this one. This one is about SSHing from all the IP address. And these are all the things that you can work on early on and provide out of the box, like without any security team involved, but provide them the tools that they can submit what they want to build and just get a quick feedback with potentially all the action necessary for them. And on top of it, what I would mention is providing just a list, again, of 100 items for people to do this is not always good. You want to help them to categorize, providing all the framework that you may use, like CIS, PCI, SOC 2, GDPR, figuring out what are the top 5 failures, the ones that are more critical that you need to fix today, and also what are the biggest resources with the biggest number of issues. And for all that, I talk a little bit about toolings and methods, but if you think about DevSecOps and shifting left, you will never achieve anything without a proper education. And this is my number 2 part, and this is what I'm doing every day with my customer, educating them on observability and security. And I think this is something I wanted to focus on right now. So the first thing that, if you're a security expert and you want to bridge the gap and create this DevSecOps culture, you need to acknowledge the gap. The people went to DevOps very recently. Some people still struggle to figure out and make people comply and be interested into all this world. So acknowledge the gap that the developers today had to learn about operations and Kubernetes and all of these kind of things that make things already complicated. Putting security into their roadmap and their brains will be kind of difficult. So you need to figure out this kind of gap there. And this one is even more important, I would say. From my experience, you cannot force people to learn. Obviously, you need to set expectations about what you expect from them, but you need to adapt to what they can do, what are the objectives right now, and potentially their ability to deliver. Not every team can deliver at the same pace. Potentially, you will have a golden team in your organization that will be kind of the leaders, and they will just test all the new software and have all of the new processes, and maybe you want to focus on them first, but all the other teams are also as important. So you need to figure out what is the right plan for you to educate each of these teams to make sure that all of them progress as a whole and that no one is left out behind. And the last part is breaking the silos, making yourself available, finding who is a sponsor in each team so that when you're not there, security is still part of the concern, still part of the discussions, and that you keep this kind of focus on security all the way through the DevOps loops, and making people aware, making people coming back to it regularly. And the last point I said guide here is don't overwhelm anyone. I think I tried that in the past, giving people a list of 100 things that they could improve. It doesn't work. Just focus on the top 5 and try to help them on this one. They don't care about all of them, and they will be overwhelmed and will not be ready to help. Cool. And so the last point I wanted to make is, if you think about security, you need to think more in terms of guardrails, not gatekeepers. People will hate you if you tell them, stop it. Your code is shit. Just come back to the beginning and do it from scratch. You want to take the guardrails and help them all along the way to make it happen. And this can come in multiple forms. You can provide them already secured cloud objects so they don't have to think about it. They know that if they use that, everything will be secured. You can think about secured libraries, like which one have been vetted by the security team. So again, they don't need to think about it. Also, actionable insight. Not everyone is an expert on security, so what can you do and when they receive a security issues, what can you do to just tell them, this is wrong, and this is how to solve it, and this is potentially a link to a documentation that will help you figure it out. Customer stories, for me, I love that, just to put that back in context about, hey, some person did that, and this is all the consequences of it. So I think it helps put people into a context and understand better what security means and how big of an impact it could have. And I think I put the last one, but there would be plenty of them. Some kind of scorecards. I know some people don't like to be measured, and they're a bit scared, especially if you use the first part of the journey towards whatever, in this case, security. So having a scorecard that's kind of a checklist that people can self-assess themselves on, okay, I've done that, but oh, this one is missing, and this is a link to documentation. Something that they don't need to show to anyone, but if you put that part of the process, they can self-assess themselves and just put the last changes, or at least improve a bit the situation. And the last point that I want to make on this presentation is about ownership. I think this is a big part of the DevOps culture. The idea is that, responsibility and control should be owned by the same person. And if you think about DevOps and security, the security is responsible for like all of the finding vulnerabilities and making sure that things don't go in production. But the control is actually owned by the developers or the DevOps team that is behind this. And so you need to have this kind of control and responsibility owned by the same person. And this is where it comes back to this HUDA loop, for those who don't know. Observe, orient, decide, and act. The idea is simply to iterate on things and give feedback all along the way, take a direction, figuring out the result, and come back in times if necessary. And so, if you don't know where to get started, actually, I wanted to compare this to the SRE team. I mean, I guess most of you must have an SRE team or SRE responsibilities here and there. And these teams are responsible for a lot of things that they don't control today. So they are responsible for system availability, latency, performances, efficiency, change management, monitoring, emergency response, and capacity planning. That's kind of a lot. And potentially, these are these groups of people that are potentially outside of it, but you have some kind of connection to this. As a developers, you may reach out to them on a regular basis, or they reach out to you to help you improve all of this. And I think you need to check on, to think of security in the same way. You have some kind of responsibility on what you want to do with the data and detecting all this. And if you don't know where to start or how your organization is structured, maybe you should look at what the SRE team has done in the past, how they came up to this kind of relationship that they have with the DevOps, all the DevOps teams, so that you can achieve the same result later on. And ultimately, I think this is how do you measure success. If you want a proper iteration, you need to measure it. And this is what everybody say, you cannot improve what you cannot measure. So that's as simple as that. And if you want some examples, I put a few here. I don't know if they are the best, but hey, I just wanted to put some. So how many vulnerabilities or findings did you find on all your cloud objects? And you can use that as a percentage, so you can see if your education, the training that you give to all the developers, improved all the secured objects of the cloud that you created have done successful, and if you see this reducing through times. You can look at, you could do the same things for containers, make sure that all your containers are secured. You can look at your security coverage, how many of your hosts have the software that you just purchased installed on it. You can look at simply on the training side. I mean, I don't know what's your security budget today, but potentially you can simply have a regular training meetings on this. And it's already a first steps toward making people aware of it and making them more interested into the security topics. Percentage of vulnerability found before stage X, we still think about shifting left. So the earlier you can find vulnerabilities, the better it is. And this could be a metric that you want to improve to bring things earlier in the process. This one is the same thing as well, is how do you find this vulnerability? Automation is always the best, but sometimes it's pen testing that you can find things. But think about how you can bring that forward and help your customers to just by themselves educate themselves on security. Tagging coverage, I think it's maybe a bit less security, but still, you want to understand what everyone is using, and having some strong enforcement on tagging, that all your resources, all your applications are properly tagged. When something happens, you will know how big is the problem and how to work on all this. And the last one I put here is this self-assessment scorecard. Yeah, people can self-assess themselves and see how good they are. I think I put a lot of last one as well. Yeah, I think I spoke about it earlier, but this lifespan of vulnerability, when Log4j vulnerability was introduced, how fast did you actually change this and made all the necessary changes behind this? So that could be an interesting one to work on. And a quick recap. So I spent some time on 3 main topics. The first one, if you want to shift left, well, there is a bunch of tools that you can start from. Pick the one that is the most appropriate to you. Just don't go all fancy and just buy all the tools in one go. Go step by step, otherwise you will overwhelm people. Education is key, and doesn't matter how much money you have, this can always happen. Even if it's a newsletter once a week, just spend some time, make people aware. We're talking about a culture change, and so this can only happen if you think about training. And the last part is about iteration, obviously. One thing I haven't mentioned before, but all the KPIs that you have today doesn't have to stick for the whole year. This is something that I learned that sometimes in companies, someone put a KPI and no one review it, like 2 years from now. Everybody knows it's completely irrelevant, but management still keep you accountable for it. So if you're not doing much today on security, figuring out the KPI that works for you today, but don't hesitate to edit that in 6 months. And this is exactly what you find in the SLO world, where today, potentially, you have an SLO that is based on the latency, and 300 milliseconds is a very good, response time to have. But maybe 6 months after, the competition improves, and 300 milliseconds is no longer valid. So you need to readjust that. And it is the same thing here. You are on a journey towards better security, so make sure that you iterate on all those KPIs to improve all this. And so I think this is my almost my last slide, but Rome wasn't built in a day. I think DevSecOps and shifting left is not something that you get out today and you will do in one go. It's a culture change, so take the steps that you feel more comfortable with today, and along the way, you will have the improvement. And so what I wanted to leave you with is, okay, what will you do next when you go back tomorrow and make you think about security? And that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions among the audience? We have one here in the front.
2 things, actually. First, I'm curious, just on your opinion as a security professional, about these new approaches to supply chain attacks, like SigStore. If you know anything about the SigStore technology, and it's sign and then store in a blockchain is kind of the pattern. So as opposed to a SaaS type of solution where we're scanning, instead it says take a fingerprint, check on a ledger to make sure that it's legit, and then there's no actual scanning of the whole dependency. Cool.
Go for it.
Maybe an easier, maybe another one that's not technology specific. I'm, because of my own interests, trying to correlate security to developer productivity. You know, you brought up Log4Shell. Our business got shut down for a week and a half because we had to, we had to delay a release because we had to go back and make sure that we were okay. So in my mind, there's no bigger detriment to productivity than a vulnerability or even a breach.
Yes.
But I haven't seen a lot of correlation of those 2 worlds, dovetailing security into productivity. Is that something that you've thought about, and do you have any metrics or anything that would be interesting there?
So I don't have any metrics, but this is, I totally agree with that. This is exactly what I was talking about on this deployment speed. I think security doesn't have to be only about software that detects vulnerabilities, but how fast can you make changes that are impacted for you, potentially 2 weeks, but some other people, large organization, there's always this edge team there that had done something that is not properly monitored and you don't even know about it. So it starts to get very complicated. So truly believe in that. One of my colleagues was, when we were discussing about this presentation, was also telling me that in his company, he was actually sitting with the security team and simply reviewing cases like what if, and figuring out like how fast could you make changes there, and what is the scopes, how many people would be affected. So it doesn't kind of help on the short term, but you can still kind of plan on how fast can you change things and make sure that potentially invest a bit more early on so that you prevent all that. But totally agree. I think there is a huge cost here. I guess it would be very difficult. It's always very difficult to justify. It's like an insurance. Like you pay X amount today, but if nothing happens, well, you invested for nothing or not. I don't know. It's just, but it's always difficult to assess. I agree.
Thank you so much. We still have time for another question, if anyone has one. Nope. All right.
All right, good.
Then, thank you so much.
Thank you. Cool.